Should have a study in front of you. It should be the one, they look very similar. I think I picked all the old ones up. 6th and 7th Commandments is where we're at. 6th and 7th Commandments. As we continue our walk, I think we're doing pretty good too. We've been getting through a couple commandments. Next week we're going to do 3 though. 8, 9, and 10. Of course, 9 and 10, they're kind of the same, you know. But we'll do those next week, and maybe the close the commandments thing that we got in there. But this is where we're going to be at this week. So let's begin in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, so you notice my little notes there. In the animated movie Finding Nemo, by the way, I love quoting movies, all right? Usually they're animated because they have some of the best lines. But the seagulls that chase after Marlin and Dory, all right, let's see if it's confession time. Who has never seen Finding Nemo? Raise your hand if you have not seen it. Okay, we're going to have to get some culture into this group. And, right, yeah. Anyway, there's these seagulls that chase after these 2 fish, because that's normal, right, you know? And of course, the 2 fish are running across land, which is normal too. And the seagulls are chasing after them. They keep going, mine, 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 mine. Hilarious stuff, right? But, so as I said, so this comical interpretation of the desires of the seagulls could also be used to represent our culture today. Our culture believes and behaves as if it should have all that we want. Okay? You know, and the bad part about it is the world is happy to help us with that. You know, you have Amazon shopping, you know, you have the big box stores, you know, where you go in there. And I really have a disease for that, by the way. I really, really have a disease for box stores because I'm thinking, you know, if you can have, you know, one of these things and they've got a package that has 6 in it. I mean, I'm sorry, I'll admit it. I am horrible. Ask my wife, right? You know, I mean, look at this. And she's sitting there going, where are we going to put it when we get home? I'm like, that's not my concern. That's a different realm, all right? I'm not into, I'm just into acquisition. Logistics is going to have to handle it after this, all right? But it is really bad. I mean, we're in a culture that just really feeds that. So, and we're going to talk more about that probably underneath the 9th and 10th commandments too, but a little bit of it today. All right, so down the right-hand side there in the box, ready? What is the 6th commandment? You shall not commit adultery. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we lead a sexually pure and decent life in what we say and do, and husband and wife love and honor each other. What is the 7th commandment? You shall not steal. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not take our neighbor's money or possessions or get them in any dishonest way, but help him to improve and protect his possessions and income. Here we go. Ready? In the middle there. These are the holy, I am alone your God, the Lord. No other God shall be adored, but you shall fully trust in me and love me wholeheartedly. Have mercy, Lord. Be faithful to your marriage vow. No lust or impure thoughts allow. Keep all your conduct free from sin. By self-control, discipline, have mercy, Lord. You shall not steal or take away what others work for night and day, but open wide a generous hand and help the poor in the land. Have mercy, Lord. You have this law to see therein, that you have not been free from sin, but also that you clearly see how pure toward God life should be. Have mercy, Lord. A couple of questions to think well for the 9th and 10th commandments. But do your prayers often include thanks for what your neighbor has that you do not have? Yeah. That's why you got to make the question so specific. So specific. There's no... I should have said, for the blessings your neighbor has that you do not have. Right. Let me add to that then. Do you thank God when He takes things from you? Yeah, right? Normally, no. You know, and it brings about a different way of thinking, because sometimes God will take away as a way of blessing. You know, of course, the biggest, understand that would probably be the Job. You know, I mean, we don't understand how much Job had to suffer so that we as a church could be blessed. You know, to see Job go through that. You know, now sometimes we go through it ourselves, but Job went through it for the church. I mean, for the church. For himself also, but also for the church, because he's part of the church. Okay? All right, so here's our question examination for the 6th and the 7th commandments. So the 6th commandment. Have I used my own pleasure, my ears to hear stories that ridicule marriage or incite cravings for the body of one who is not my spouse? Have I indulged my eyes in looking with longing for my sexual satisfaction from a man or woman who is not my spouse? Have I used pornographic materials? Have I dishonored marriage by ridicule, divorce, or neglecting to encourage others to be faithful in the fear of God to their spouses? Have I had sexual intercourse with a man or woman who is not my spouse? Have I dishonored my spouse by neglecting to care for the body and the needs of the other, withdrawing faithfulness from them? Have I failed to trust God to bless us in our marriage, even in times of trouble? And have I neglected to worship, pray, and follow the fear and love of God in times of sexual temptation? Have I practiced thoughts, words, and deeds, or given support to homosexual activity? Below the line is the 7th commandment. Have I been lazy at work, doing poor work in school or at the job, working hard only when the boss was around? Have I been stingy in paying my workers? Have I worked for myself rather than for Christ and for the benefit of my neighbor? Have I cared for the property in the neighborhood, school, or church so that it was improved? Have I stolen from the office, from school, or church, or stood silently while others took what was not theirs? Have I wasted time and food and money, or caused others to waste time and money by my neglect? Have I been greedy when it comes to returning to the Lord a generous portion of my money as a thank offering? Have I stolen from my neighbor when I did not help him in time of his need? And again, the questions help us to realize that there is no completion to the commandment. There is always more that can be done. All right, so top of that next page, as we go into the 6th commandment, Genesis chapter 2 and Mark chapter 10. Remember, you can start looking at these passages ahead of time and be ready to read them out loud when they come. All right? But what is the blessing of the 6th commandment? And there can be more than one thing you say here, by the way. What is the blessing of the 6th commandment? And we're going to read that Mark 10 and Genesis 2, but there's more things you could add than what is just in those two small passages, all right?
Marriage itself.
Is what?
Marriage itself.
Yeah, to even have a spouse, and we're going to look at that Genesis 2 thing. And this is the unique part about it. As that's being read, and I forget, it's not all the verses, but as being read, remember this. And this is the unique part about it. So as Adam is given all the things in creation, right? And he's the only one made at this point in time, and God's bringing everything by him. Name it, he says. Everything's coming by him. Name it. Well, as it's coming by, remember how it said God made everything? A mate and its pair. You know, they're pairs. So everything's coming by in pairs. And he's naming them. These are cows. whatever it was in his language back then. Kawas. These are chickenas. These are, I don't know how it sounded back then, right? But he's naming all these things. Everything's in pairs. And so the whole time he's like, not a mistake that God did that, right? And I love the words of Adam, right? And I've thought about changing the marriage vows so that when they get married, the man, after he does it, he says, at last, bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, right? And he should say, she shall be called my woman because God has joined her to me. Just like Adam says she was taken from my flesh. I mean, he's not even a day old yet. And he's like, at last. All right? Okay, did anybody pull up that Genesis chapter 2, 15 to 24? Yep. That's suitable. There's so much to be said in this Genesis text that sets us up for the understanding of marriage, and what it is. And that's why it's a hallmark, for premarital counseling, for marital counseling, whatever it is. It's a hallmark text, as Adam is sitting there and he realizes, wait a minute, everything is going to multiply. Everything's going to multiply. Things are going to, the responsibility is going to get greater and greater because everything's made to increase. I'm going to need somebody to help me out on this, right? And I love it because God says there was not a helper fit for him, is your translation. I think some say suitable helper, a helper suitable for him, to do these things. In other words, what is man's best friend? Yeah, that's what we say, right? Man's best friend, right, is the dog, which I don't even know where that ever came from because it's the same thing that bites your hand when you try to help it, But, and he had the horse to carry the load. He had the dog to walk by his side, but there wasn't anybody fit for him. And that's what we see in marriage is that, God is choosing for us somebody that is fit, somebody that is purposeful for us, in other words, to help us out with these things. Did anybody look up Mark 10, 6 through 9?
But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. But therefore God has joined together, let no man separate.
So now, Adam and Eve were made in the image and likeness of God without any blemish or spot or stain or whatever it is. It didn't mean, again, this is what God looks like, though I've tried to convince Miranda over and over again, that this is it, That's not what it is. It's his righteousness, his purity, and all that kind of stuff, right? But then Eve is not made outside of that either, right? because she's actually made from a rib of Adam. As he breathed life into Adam, and now that becomes part of the blood of who Adam is, that ruach, that spirit that comes into him, Eve receives it as well then through the rib that she's made from Adam. So she receives that initial breath. And every offspring from then receives that initial breath from their parents as they come forward and are brought forward as offspring, receiving that comes from God. It keeps going forward and forward. And Jesus emphasizes this, and when we get, and he does it in more than one gospel. We see this emphasized where Jesus goes back, and Paul, by the way, quotes from that Genesis text as well, to see that when we choose a spouse in holiness and in honor, and we vow ourselves to one another, we make a pledge to one another and to God. That's why we do it in the congregation, right? It is just as valid and certain as that very first one. And you got to, nowadays you watch the chick flick, we call them in our household, right? And they're out and about, and they're engaged, and she catches him kissing, some old girlfriend or whatever it is, right? What does she do? She rips the ring off and chucks it at him, right? And that's what you see happen. She rips the ring off and chucks it out. Well, there's no way that, when Eve came home and found Adam, still hadn't vacuumed the carpets yet or something like that, that she could pull the rib out and boomerang it at him, okay? In other words, you can't undo what God has done. Jesus emphasized that's how we're supposed to see marriage. It cannot be undone by the will of man, and he confronts the Pharisees that say that Moses allowed us to have a certificate of divorce, and God said, and he says, Moses allowed you because of the hardness of your heart. That's why he did that, not because that was ever right by God's law. It was never right by God's law. We're supposed to see yourselves as just as united as Adam and Eve. There's no way that was coming apart. She could not give the rib back, okay? And that's how we are as well in our marriages, okay? So underneath the blessings of marriage, support, companionship, pleasure, all right? Childbearing, to be able to manage the world, okay? So, simple question, but nonetheless, we're going to look at the scriptures that go with it. Next one, how do we break this commandment? Matthew 19 and Matthew 5. And then the other one, Matthew 5, 27 and 28.
You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery in his heart.
Okay, so how do we break this commandment then? What does this text tell us? Unfaithful, through divorce, through unchastity. And the reality is everybody's actually broken this commandment. And Jesus at another point in time says, if you look at a woman with a lustful intent, you should pluck your eyeballs out, right? Okay? Now, there wouldn't be a seeing person in the world then, right? We'd be like a bunch of moles or something like that. Trying to make a living crawling around under the earth. The point is not go around pluck your eyes. And he follows it up with, by the way, if you're going to steal something, chop your hand off. He doesn't want you chopping your hands off. He doesn't want you plucking your eyeballs out. He's talking about how big of a prone thing this is going to be for you. It's going to be a big deal for you. It talks in Ecclesiastes how, Song of Solomon, Ecclesiastes, one of those. The guy says that one of the big things to do for his wife is to make a vow with his eyes. To make a vow with his eyes. In other words, I vow to only look at my spouse. I vow to see only my spouse with those eyes of, that loving intent or whatever it is, and I vow not to do it with anybody else, okay? Now, again, Jesus warns us because it's a prevalent thing to us. It's part of our fallen nature. God has given us to be drawn to one another, but it usually becomes a problem for us, okay? And so how do we break this commandment? Sexual immorality, and they could even be thoughts, all right? Unchastity, divorce, and, we could even add in there, by the way, senseless marriage, okay? So in other words, if we don't take somebody with the proper intent, that's senseless marriage. You're not vowing that which is supposed to be a bond between two people, okay? Okay, next one's pretty easy. How do we keep this commandment? Hebrews 13, Philippians 4, and 1 Timothy 2.
Let marriage be held in honor among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled, for God will judge the
Okay. All right. Keep it pure and undefiled. All right. Philippians 4.
Finally, brothers, whatever is true. Oh, Philippians 4.
Yep, you're good. Yep.
Verse 8. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things.
Okay. And then finally, 1 Timothy 2, 9 and 10.
Likewise also, that women should adorn themselves with respectful apparel, with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly attire.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So lead a sexually pure and decent life. In other words, hold marriage in high regard. We all joke about marriage and its struggles and troubles and all that kind of stuff. But we want to stop the derogatory talk about marriage. It's okay to laugh because there is differences between male and females that we can find some pleasure in. But we want to stop the derogatory talk about marriage. I love the passage from Paul because we should think on those things that are good. And Paul's talking about this in a church that's going through a lot of struggle. And one of the struggles in the church, by the way, was these temptations into the various immoralities and idolatries that were going on in the culture. And so he says one of the things you can do to protect yourself is not so much try to avoid all the evil stuff, but go to the good stuff. You don't want to leave the house vacant. Jesus tells us a story about how they kicked the demon out and left the house vacant. Well, 7 more came in. No, the house should always be full. The house should always be full, but it should be full of good, wholesome, healthy. So we give good talk. We praise our spouses. We do these kind of things to hold those things up. And then, of course, the last one is the adornment. Now, why does St. Paul, why doesn't he say, men, make sure that you're dressed accordingly, wear pants that are long? Why does he pick on the ladies?
Well, I would assume it's because men are more prone for sight as opposed to women. That's just the way they're created.
There is a difference, people. Okay? Despite what our culture is trying to tell us today, there is a difference between men and women. Okay? And the troubles and the desires and all that kind of stuff, and even though, I'm not saying that women aren't visually attracted to men, it's not the same way that men are visually attracted to women, all right? I mean, literally, we lose our minds, okay? And we it's just the reality of it. We got to admit, all you guys out there, oh, that's never happened to me. Liar! Okay? It happens to all of us, and so it becomes very important that we protect ourselves from that. And the culture today, it does not want to protect us from these things. It doesn't want to. It wants to really invite us into these things. And that's the work of the devil of the world, which our sinful nature has to struggle against because it likes to join that. All right. Christians see their bodies differently than unbelievers. 1 Thessalonians 4 and Romans 6. So 1 Thessalonians 4, 3 through 5, and Romans 6, 4.
For this is the will of the First Thessalonians. For this is the will of God, your sanctification, that you abstain from sexual immorality, that each one of you know how to control his own body in holiness and honor, not in the passion of lust like the Gentiles do not know God. You got it?
I think, is that 3 through 5? Sorry. Okay, very good. And then the next one, Romans 6, 4. We're going to put them together.
We were buried therefore with him by baptism into death, in order that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, we too might walk in newness of life.
Right. And the problem with the world and our culture, and it's been this way across all cultures and times, by the way, but we see it in ours as well, is that we see our bodies as our own, right? What's the big mantra today when it comes to the pro-choice stuff? My body, my choice, right? I mean, that's the thing. It's my body, it's my choice. Get to do with it. But you are not your own. You are not your own. First of all, and this was being brought out in this text, you belong to the Lord. And your temple, or your body, is a temple of the Lord, where the Holy Spirit dwells. So And St. Paul talks about this. He says this, would you take the body of Christ and join it with a prostitute? Right? And you're like, oh my gosh, that's strong language, right? But he's making that sense. Don't do that with your own body. You are a temple of the Lord. And so we see ourselves as holy. And again, not that we don't see ourselves as sinners. We still see ourselves as sinners. But we see that body as a temple of the Holy Spirit. And so that's not the way the world sees it. They see it as a vessel to use the way they want. And I think it's coming up. Hang on a second. Yeah, let's just go to that one real quick. 1 Corinthians 7, 2 through 5. It's down a couple. Somebody read that. 1 Corinthians 7, 2 through 5.
But because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have the authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does.
One more verse.
One more. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control.
Right. So, I'll make it easy. Whose body is this? God's. And who's next? Miranda's. That's right. That's like, I always do this, right? When Miranda's, she's doing something, she trips or something. Easy on my body there. Easy, easy, easy. All right? Because that belongs to me. That's that righteous jealousy that we talk about that the Lord has. He can be jealous over us because we belong to Him. I can be jealous over Brenda because she belongs to me, and vice versa. And so we give one another for the very purpose of protection. And I'll give you concrete examples. When I do marital counseling, and the guy says, well, my wife's going off and she's talking to these other people and not talking to me. And I said, I said, so she's refusing to talk to you when you want to talk? Well, I don't ever want to talk to her. Why are you depriving her of this need that she has? If she needs to talk, she wants to be with you. And the same thing, the lady's like, well, he's running off with other women. He won't come to my bed. I said, have you been inviting him into your bed? No. Why are you depriving him of these things when God has given you as protection for his temptations? And the same thing, why are you depriving her of these things if God has given you to protect her for these things? And we don't see it that way. We always just see, well, gosh, this is a burden to me or whatever it is. No, this is a gift that God has given that you get to take care of somebody. And that's a very different view. All the guys are in here going, okay. Honey, it's protection. Buzz off. Yeah, go do the laundry. When the laundry's done, protect me. Yeah. I think that made me blush. All right, here we go. This includes how we think and talk, not just actions. Ephesians 5:4. I forget off the top of my head what that says. Somebody got that? Ephesians 5:4. Something about crude talk.
Let there be no filthiness, nor foolish talk, nor crude joking, which are out of place, but instead let there be thanksgiving.
Okay. So even, again, how we discuss these type of things, and I think I mentioned, I think it was in here, I can never remember where I say what. But, when we're, like the witnesses at your marriage or whatever it is, and then later on, the guy's hanging out with his friends at the bar, and he's just like, man, my wife, oh my gosh, I didn't know I was getting into this, you know, and all this kind of stuff. And we don't want to talk bad about the other person, but that's one of the reasons why we choose good witnesses, because then the witnesses are there to say, hey, dude, that's not what you do. You know, go home, take care of your wife. You know, the same thing when she's hanging out with her friends later on. She's like, oh, him, you know, I not only did the laundry, but I shoveled the walk this week, you know, and he's about as worthless as they come, you know, and they are to, again, encourage her, hey, listen, you go home to your husband, take care of him, you know, I mean, that's what it's for. We want to keep the talk as positive, even when we need to vent, you know, which sometimes sort of happens. We all still want to go back to what is this joy and this gift that the Lord has given to us in our spouse. All right, now, marriage brings blessings, and we know this Genesis 1:28. And by the way, kind of an interesting thing, you might notice that I put that 9:7 down there, Genesis 9:7. Guess what? You guys should know that. What's Genesis, the end of Genesis 9? What's Genesis like 7, 8, and 9? Flood, there you go. Right? And so when we get to Genesis 9, what's interesting about that 9:7 is it's the same thing that's said in 1:28. So even after God completely destroys the face of the earth, he then restores that you're still going to prosper on the face of the earth, right? Be fruitful and multiply, it says in Genesis 1:28, right? Be fruitful and by the way, notice it's two things. Be fruitful and multiply. So what's the fruitful part? Well, we know what the multiply part is. Have babies, right? What's the fruitful part? Or are you just saying have babies and have babies? Have babies and have more babies. The fruitful part is actually just the prospering underneath of the management of the creation that you've got. So in other words, your household should be fruitful and multiplying. In other words, you're taking care of it. You're raising your household. You're doing the things that God has intended. Okay? So then what about cohabitation, pornography, homosexuality, transgenderism, and all these kind of things? You know, what do we say to these things? Now we know what we often think. All right, you know it's revolting to us or whatever it is, you know, and we don't like those type of things. But what do we say to these things? It's very simple, people. It's okay, it's wrong. And what I like to say is that is not God's intent for you. It's not his will for you. You know, his will for you is greater than that. His will for you is more blessed. His will for you, by the way, is the same thing that he has in his will in his relationship with you. That he is the groom and you are the bride. And that it's kept in holiness and all these kind of things. I mean, you guys remember the consequence, or not the consequence, the trouble that Hosea had, right? He had to marry the prostitute. Do you remember why God said that?
Well, what is it? Silence between Israel?
Because God is the Father, the one who has given us his word, and so Hosea was the prophet giving the word, and so he wanted the nation of Israel to see what it was like to be married to them. And so he gave the example in Hosea. Here's what it's like. Hosea, go and marry this prostitute.
He did.
Yep. And what's very interesting is after he married the prostitute, it wasn't like she had a clean life. Guess what she kept doing? She kept prostituting, right? And that was God saying, listen, this is what it's like, people. He said, this is what it's like trying to keep you in check, you know, which again, it's not a very flavorful picture, or it is a flavorful picture, not a very favoring picture. But, you know, that's what it is. And God's trying to tell us, you are a holy people. You are mine. You are beloved, despite who you are. And this is what our marriage relationship is supposed to be like, you know. I always tell people this, you know. Miranda does not really need me when everything's going well, right? I come home and she's like, no, like every day usually. You know, she's vacuuming, folding the clothes, you know, and that's all good, you know, right? But when I come home and she's like, you know, well, that's usually the moment where I'm like, I gotta go, right? I gotta get out of it. But that's the exact moment that she actually needs me. That's when she needs me. The time that, and usually what happens is when the person's attacking you is when we want to leave, but that's actually the time that they need you the most. Well, see, and God demonstrates that in the gift that he gives to us. I mean, what does St. Paul say? God did not come to, he came to you while we were still sinners. While we were still sinners. And so this is why we go to our spouse, because they're the ones that God has intended for us to take care of. They need us in those hours, so we go in there and we do it, no matter what the situation is. And remember, as you do that, as you're interacting with your spouse, and really anybody in the world, you're doing it for the sake of Christ. So in other words, when, Miranda, I come home and let's just say I'm in a bad mood. Oh, man, I just came from an elders meeting. Right, And then she's just going to reflect Christ back onto me. Oh, well, I'm sure you did well. I'm sure it was good. Now, say I come home and I'm in a great mood. Hey, I'm glad you're having a good day. In other words, it doesn't matter what I'm doing. She's going to reflect Christ. We're a reflection of Christ, not the world. And the problem is it's hard to do because you come home and someone's like, you go, and we're both are just going, and you start doing it. No, reflect Christ. Hey, there's joy in the world. There's the hope of Christ. And that's the thing that can make us difference in any of our reactions. You walk in the store and somebody's rude or somebody's having a bad day. Well, you're not there to reflect them. That's what the world does. You're there to reflect Christ, to see Christ standing behind them. And there's no better place to practice this than in marriage, because you get to do it all the time. Right? No better place to practice it. Wow, that went long around the bend on that one. That's all right. We're going to the seventh. Any questions on the sixth commandment before we go to the seventh commandment? All right. What is the blessings of the seventh commandment? Luke 19 and Psalm 104. The Luke 19, 1 through 10 is a little bit longer.
He entered Jericho and was passing through, and there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich, and he was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was of small stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all grumbled. He has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. And Jesus said to him, Today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost.
All right. Mark 10, 6 through 9. Oh, sorry. I did. I looked up above. Psalm 104, 14 and 15.
He makes grass grow for the cattle and plants for people to cultivate, bringing forth fruit from the earth, wine that gladdens human hearts, oil to make their faces shine, and bread that sustains their hearts.
I love that 104. Should have probably read that one first. Love that 104. So, because what's the blessing of the seventh commandment? All things that God gives you. Shiny faces, apparently. I didn't know that's what oil was supposed to do. Of course, I usually get pretty shiny because of oil anyway. But, we have shiny faces, and we have food that makes the heart grow glad and all that kind of stuff. That we see possessions as the Lord bestowing gifts upon us. Bestowing gifts upon us. And Zacchaeus was seeing possessions as a way of amassing things to make himself more comfortable. I keep mentioning that. I mentioned it today. Miranda and I have been watching that show, The Chosen. Has anybody watched that show, The Chosen? Oh, really? Nobody has. Oh, Nara has. Have you watched the whole thing yet? We haven't watched the whole thing yet. Very interesting. Very interesting. I'd almost love to do it like as a group, watch and then discuss what goes on in that. But, you look at Matthew, the tax collector in this case. It's Matthew who's right in there right away. And, he was doing things. He got into this to make his life comfortable. In the show, they have him kind of being he's a tax collector, and he has phobias. He doesn't like to touch things and stuff like that. Well, as he got rich and acquired wealth, he didn't have to touch things. He was making his life comfortable, and that's what we see it. Well, God doesn't give you possessions so that you can be comfortable. He gives you possessions so that you first would be cared for, but also He gives you possessions so that you would care for others as well, that you would be there. It's like somebody said to me one time, of course, we just came from Nebraska, and you know who the big rich guy is in Nebraska, right? Buffett, right. Warren Buffett, right? He's a big rich guy. They said, is it okay for somebody to be that rich? What do you guys think? Brogan's like, I'm working on it, man. I'm getting there. And Mom and Dad are like, yes, you are. Yeah. And the answer is no, it's okay, but is it all for self? Is it all for, whatever it is, for personal glorification or personal comfort or whatever it is? So in other words, you can have your Warren Buffetts, your Trumps and all this kind of stuff, and especially if that's the gift that God gave them was management and money, and then they use that to employ thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or whatever it is. There's the great guy in Kearney. If you ever go to Kearney, Nebraska, there's a convention center right by the interstate. Eunice is the name, right? This guy's the epitome of doing that. Because, and I don't even know anything about the guy except his generosity. That's all I know. He could be whatever religion, I don't know. But he's very wealthy. He's done very well for himself, but he's always taking care of his employees. His employees praise him when you walk into the building. I mean, he got to the point where he needed people to work, and people couldn't move to the area and find housing, all that kind of stuff. So he built a thing that looks like a hotel. It's just apartments for his workers. So if they come and they want to work, they have a place, he puts them in there and says, hey, stay here, work. That's taking the wealth, and he's given tons back to the city and all this kind of stuff. Now, he's probably still living in the castle on the hill. Of course, there's no hills in Nebraska, but he's still probably living in the castle on the hill. But as long as he continues to take care of others, then these things are okay. And it's the same thing. People are like, well, is it okay that I own the Corvette? I said, yeah, that's how you're going to help people get to the hospital faster. It's fine. That's a good thing. And then, or they're like, can I have the RV? And I said, that's fine. I said, when we're out on vacation together, it'll be just fine. You go and have the RV. Honey, I can get you there faster. You're going to be the one going in the emergency room if you buy the Corvette. All right, back on track, people. How do we break this commandment? And we'll look up maybe a couple of these here. John 12, Ephesians 4, they're all single verses. Let's read them real quick. Anybody got them? John 12, Ephesians 4, and Psalm 37.
Jesus said this, not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, and having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was to put into it.
Right. So this is Judas who was helping himself, was what he was doing. And by the way, I do believe actually that the disciples had actually a lot of money. We see, which one is it? Andrew, I think, asked Jesus, should I go out and buy 100 denarii worth of bread, which had been 100 days' wages of bread? And I believe they had the money because they all just came back from their mission trip where the 70 were sent out, and they've been collecting alms and doing this kind of things. And so and otherwise, if they didn't have any money, what would Judas be tempted with? But he was tempted, wasn't he? Right? And you see all that, and that's a problem. Our eyes deceive us, and they betray us. Did anybody do the next one? What was it? Ephesians 4? This is a good one, too.
Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need.
Yeah, and we're going to come to a passage, if we get there today, where St. Paul says, the laborer should work. Laziness is off. If you're, you're supposed to be on the job and you're, thumbing through Facebook or whatever, that's stealing. Because your employer is paying you for the time. That's stealing from your employer. If you're sitting around or whatever it is, don't do that. That's actually theft. Okay. The last one, Okay. And this is a hard one in our society today because we live in a debt-based economy. Very hard. Okay? I don't know if anybody in here has done it. I can tell you right now I haven't. How many of you bought your house without a loan? You know? It doesn't hardly happen. Doesn't hardly happen. Now, it might for some. We're hoping that maybe someday if we ever decide to downsize, we can buy the house and the RV. You know, when we sell ours and we get out of that one. But it doesn't happen. I mean, you look at people starting off. We are in a debt-based society, you know, and Jesus, you know, says neither a borrower nor a lender be, you know, but be someone, you know, and then he talks about your yes be yes and your no be no. And it's hard in a society today that works off of debt as a form of income, which is what we see in our culture today, okay? But don't borrow without return. Yeah, let's keep going here for the time being. So how do we keep this commandment? Exodus 22:14 and Exodus 23:4 and 5, and then Philippians 2:4.
Exodus, if a man borrows anything of his neighbor and it is injured or dies, the owner not being with it, he shall make restitution.
Yep. And then jump ahead a little bit and do that 23, Exodus 23:4 and 5.
If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall bring it back to him. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying down under its burden, you shall refrain from leaving him with it. You shall rescue it from him.
Right. So in other words, you know, we're supposed to watch out for our neighbor's possessions. If you see something there's going astray, you see these things happening, whatever it is, it's not just don't take what belongs to them, but help them to protect their possessions and income as we confess in that commandment. You know, be there for them, to watch out for them, you know. If you see that there's going to be some sort of harm that's going to come to their possessions. Did anybody look up the last one there, the Philippians 2:4?
Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others.
Right. Yep. Watching out for others, you know. And again, and especially in our privacy fence culture we live in today, that's kind of hard to do, you know. I mean, everybody's got their fence and it separates you from the next person, so you don't have to deal with their stuff, you know, and nobody wants you to come over. You know, the neighbors come home and they drive straight in the garage and shut the door. You know.
Send a message.
What other things might be considered neighbor's possession? I put this on here kind of as a bonus.
Good name.
Good name, yep, that's a good one. Ideas, right? You know, somebody says, you know what? I bet I could make a fortune doing this. And you run down the copyright office and get that sucker sealed, right? Writings, plagiarism we call it. You know, don't take from somebody else's writing without giving credit.
I think we're responsible for their safety as well,
Mhm.
within our ability.
Yep. Don't take what is theirs and make sure that they are protected in everything that they have. A big one today is identity theft, right? You guys watch that movie, Identity Thief? You guys, come on.
Nobody went big with me.
I think it's kind of a naughty movie. Yeah, that's what's her McCartney name, right? Yeah. She's so funny. Oh my gosh, she's ridiculous. Yeah. I'm trying to decide which one I want to do. Let's do this one next. Let's do this one. It says, why is it that I don't need my neighbor's stuff? Psalm 65, Hebrews 11, and 2 Thessalonians 3. Why don't I need my neighbor's stuff?
I got Psalms 9.
Okay.
You visit the earth and water it. You greatly enrich it. The river of God is full of water. You provide their grain, for so you have prepared it.
All right. You don't need it because God's going to take care of you. You don't need your neighbor's stuff. Talks about this. You know, what is you see the lily? Do you see the bird? God takes care of them. What are you worried about? What's the next one? Hebrews 11:20.
By
Yeah, so in other words, you have somebody to take care of you. God appoints authorities, all right? So you don't need to think about yourself. All right, how am I going to police my own neighborhood or whatever it is? No, God set up authorities to help you police your neighborhood. How am I going to make it all the way through school? God gave you parents, right? So he waters the earth. He gives you those in authority that will help you. And last one, 2 Thessalonians 3.
For even when we were with you, we would give you this command. If anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat.
Yeah. Get a job. Sha-na-na-na, sha-na-na-na-na. Get a job. Right? God's gave you your body. Go use it. I love it when the elderly, and they can't do what they used to do anymore. They're walking around, barely making it. Like, oh, why is it, Pastor? What's going on? I'm like, well, you rode that horse hard and put it away wet. You wore it out. Rejoice, but it hurts. You used it. You should be happy. You wore that sucker out. You weren't supposed to put it in the closet and keep it, You're supposed to take it out and use it. And guess what? You use it, what happens to it? It wears out, don't be happy necessarily. Go get some titanium, all right? But rejoice that you did what you're supposed to do. You wore your body out. You weren't supposed to park it. You were supposed to use it, Thanks be to God that you did, because now the next generation is going to follow your example. They're going to use their body too until the day that it's also taken into eternity. Different way of thinking about it, isn't it? Ow, I'm rejoicing. I'm rejoicing. All right, we're going to stop there, people. Read through the rest of those on your own. And we will pick up 8, 9, and 10 next week to close up the commandments so we can wrap up our review of the 10 commandments. And, of course, obviously we'll go into the Apostles' Creed after that. Let's close today with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever.